Locations are very important to me, and the Bothiet store is by far the most significant one in my life. It is a place to wind down in, a place to recharge the batteries, and a place to explore. Beachcombing is a daily occupation, also random digging out of curiosity in the hope of finding something interesting. A small fragment of wood or rustling metal can set the imagination racing.
In 1970, we were given the key to a bothy up at Stowe Point, and since then that has been the main focus for the work that I've been doing, and it's resulted in our moving into and renting and then later buying a lighthouse store, which was used by the men who built the lighthouse at Stowe Point to live in and keep the horses in when they were building the lighthouse, as all the stone came ashore at that point that was going to be used for the lighthouse. The place itself, I think, is, although it's bleak and very exposed, has a kind of magic about it.
I love getting up early in the morning. It's still, quiet, and the mind can play on words and write down all kinds of thoughts that one might have, and out of that you can cull together just a handful of words sometimes that seem to make some kind of sense. In other words, sum up a particular kind of mood. Boatyards have always held a fascination for me. As a child, much of my exploring was done in that kind of environment, either on the Thames or in the West Country or on Tyneside. I first visited Gerard's boatyard in Arbroath nearly 20 years ago. I find boat building a fascinating activity and an exciting thing to witness. The textures, the smell of wood, paint and tar, and the slow, patient building from keel up through the placing of the frames on ribs and the planking, the gradual emergence of what I consider to be a thing of great beauty.
One of the major changes that we found every time we went north was the fact that we weren't finding the timber that we needed to light the fire and cook the food and making bits of furniture and or even repairing the place. But what is happening is that the timber on the beach is being completely supplanted by masses of plastic in all kinds of forms, huge pieces of containers and so forth, which are basically from the oil industry, I suppose. There's masses of netting, masses of tangles of ropes, huge things that look like amazing kind of tapestries. And but every year it becomes more and more, but nothing is going to remove this.
What is one of the most relaxing things is the actual just the living here, so that there's a kind of routine performed every morning, which is first of all lighting the fire and using timber from the beach and boiling up kettle and so on, and then gathering water from the stream, which we have. So there's a real pleasure, a sort of Robinson Crusoe existence, and finding things on the beach that might be useful for building works here. And as you see, most of the furniture that's been here was made here by Bob from timber from the beach. A lot of it, the original fish box wood, the porch itself is fish box wood. That was excellent for burning as well. And so over the years, it's the beach has provided us with nearly everything here.
I think that the place has become very, very important. And in the earlier days, we'd go there as soon as my work at the College of Art in Edinburgh had finished. In the very early days, it took 11 hours to get there. And when you got there, you took the shutters off, you got a fire lit, you maybe had a dram, and there's no phone, there's no fax, there's nothing there but the wind and the rain, and it doesn't matter whether it's wet or windy or beautiful. There is a kind of warmth about the place.
Just, a wonderful existence for perhaps a month of the summer. The afternoons were spent researching on the shore, drawing, reading, and winding down from the pace of life, the normal pace of life. It's just, I think it's been a very, very valuable catalyst for both Bob and myself, and him in particular.
Certainly at one stage, we would be going up 3 times a year, a couple of weeks at Christmas, which was again fantastic because of the gales and the storms. That sort of attachment is very, very important to me, and I think it is to Liz as well.
The thing about it is it's so humble and modest, but so solidly built. But as soon as you step inside and see the drawing above the fireplace of the elevation of the lighthouse that's 150 odd years old, that they've painted very carefully, painted around not to destroy it when they've, and it's above the hearth. It is just jaw-droppingly beautiful as a drawing. I mean, it's kind of like, it reminded me when I first saw it of those kind of Renaissance kind of that it's not absolutely pristine in its colour or its, but it's just so elegant in its context.
A boat, in a sense, is a life and alive. Its birth and growth is a long and difficult process, which ends with its launching, a time of optimism, and an occasion that gives pleasure and a feeling of pride. Its working life is often hard. It has to protect the crew and store the cargo in the most awful conditions. With bad management or ill treatment, it can come to an early end, or it can live a long life. Well built on oak frames, it can survive nearly anything the elements can produce to destroy it. As it ages and matures, like us I guess, it creaks and groans in a heavy sea. It has a flexible skin and doesn't tend to break in half as giant tangers do. When a boat dies, it's usually through neglect, or through being eaten by tornado worms, or through human error and lack of care. Or quite often, the sheer awesome power of the sea may just destroy it. And then, more often than not, the remains are washed ashore. Fragments in all shapes and sizes, rotten, splintered, flaking, twisted, and bent, with rusting bolts and straps. Or it may lie almost intact on the seabed, and if it is of historical interest, it can be raised from the sea. Occasionally, it may be buried by silt, and the sea may recede in time, and the boat may lie buried for many centuries, and then it may be discovered and excavated. It's a fossilized state.
So the very early work that I did when we first went up was really making paintings on the beach and along the shoreline. But I kept to the idea of working between high and low tide, basically. And that was very important, that I had a kind of restriction on the area that I was going to use for making work. So a lot of these were paintings, and some of them were worked on later at home in the studio. And They were quite large. It was 13, 14, 18 feet long and about 6 feet high. And they followed the kind of track of the tide lines and what was left behind. So you'd get maybe a very thin, almost like a drawn line of black seaweed along the high tide mark. And then there would be a vestige of other previous high tides, so that you got a very subtle kind of landscape form. The idea being that basically the landscape was beneath your feet rather than spreading away to a horizon line and clouds and storms and all the rest of it. This was very much focusing down into what was immediately and very close to you. Because I sort of stuck with that, I learned a terrific amount, so that the beach paintings became paintings of rock pools, and I did a lot of photography as well, so that I would photograph the same rock pool year after year as we went up, whether it was in the summer or at Easter or in the winter time, just to really record the changes of what had happened. And in the same way I photographed the beaches, so that there's one photograph which was taken in probably 71, 72, and the beach looks as though it's lined with driftwood. And that, of course, is not the way it is today. You have to go a long way to find a decent piece of driftwood now. And as a result of all this sort of fairly tight painting of beaches and their structure, I felt that I'd got to a point which meant that the idea of just keeping on doing that and doing that and doing that wasn't really going to develop in the way that I felt the work could develop. And there were several things that happened at the same time. There was the fact that at the college in Edinburgh where I taught, we started paper making, and I became a bit frustrated by the rather nice bits of paper that people were making, kind of A4 sheets, and there would be some petals or something pressed into it, and I thought, well, yeah, okay. But the Chinese and the Japanese made amazing things out of papier-mâché, marvelous furniture and structures and so on. And I thought, well, there must be something in this. And at the same time as this was happening, we had a wreck up at Stowe Point shortly before we were going up, and it was a fishing boat with 5 people on it, fishermen, and it went down with all hands. It hit the rocks just beneath the lighthouse, and unfortunately everyone lost their lives, and the boat was just sheared in two by the rocks. And so by the time we got there was all this stuff, flotsam and jetsam, coming in from the boat, bits of net and huge bits of timber and so on. And I thought I would like to make something which was a kind of memorial or a homage to people who live on boats and work on boats. And so I decided that I really needed to make some kind of structures here. And so it was the paper making thing, wanting to make structures which, before that point, the structures were like rock faces I was making out of papier-mâché and so on. And so I decided, and I got an access to a lot of cardboard, and I used to go around Skips and Leith getting all the cardboard out from outside television shops and that sort of thing, where you get good boxes and things. And so that's how it really started. And of course the fact that they were made out of cardboard, I could move them around really very easily, or fairly easily. And it allowed me to make really quite large structures.
I took one of his very large runs to the exhibition, the Chicago Art Fair. And a man came up to the stand and said, "Gee, I guess that cost you a lot of freight to bring that over here. How did you do that?" And I said, "Pick it up." And he looked at me and said, "Ha ha," you know. And I said, "No, pick it up." And when he did, he just walked away and thought, "There's something mad going on here. I don't understand this." And he simply couldn't grasp it. But the majority of people did grasp it, and that was what it was about.
So it kind of grew, and I had a couple of big shows in the Talbot Rice, and that sort of spread the word a bit, or spread the knowledge of the work.
Well, I had the gallery in Edinburgh, which I opened in '82, and somebody came in and said, "There's an exhibition I think you would like at the Talbot Rice." And I went down to the Talbot Rice, and I liked the exhibition exceedingly. As a dealer, you look for people who are individuals and have their own viewpoint, and it varies enormously. But he was doing something that nobody else was doing, as far as I knew, and I admired it and liked the craft in it as much as the art in it. And I liked him very much, and he was very good to work with.
His humanity was huge. I think that humanity and inspiration are the two things that, you know, kind of a boyish, ancient wisdom with such humanity. You know, it is a mixture of a kind of a Zen abbot with a little naughty boy inside or something. You know, this is wonderful kind of playful wisdom or something. I'm not entirely sure, and I genuinely think that he wouldn't be happy me kind of like trying to sum him up. But I think he inspired so many people. I mean, he was a constant, quiet inspiration.
A lot of people sort of ask, and they say, "Well, why is it what you do, plastic beach? Why don't you just pick up the beach, the plastic off the beach, and set it up the way you have with these objects that you've made?" And the answer for me is quite simple. I could do that, and a lot of artists do use found material. Some do it because they can't do it any other way. Others, maybe like Joseph Beuys, do it, and it lends the material, or he imbues the material with something very special, I think, which is marvelous. My reason for making what I find is simple. I'm a maker, and I just couldn't do it any other way. I have to make these things.
I think I responded to what he was about and what interested him, and I was a great admirer of his craftsmanship, because half of what he was doing was craftsmanship. It's very important to his artistic work. And I have always valued things which are handmade, and it's not a word you would normally use about art, but Bob's work 100% handmade, and watching him do things was always a great pleasure.
It's like it's a kind of test in a way, and I'm fascinated by what hands can manage. It's not just hands, of course, it's coordination and and some kind of brain working behind it all. But it's not that the things have to be photorealistic in particular, but it's that it's important that the objects capture the kind of mood and the feel of these materials.
I think the thing about Bob's work, that it was always produced a double take, because you saw the object and then you looked at it again and it wasn't quite what you thought it was, and then you looked at it again and it was something else as well. And all those things about the beauty of the object, the craftsmanship, and also the message were all there, and they came through to you without anybody having to talk about it. It was within the work, and I think that's what people responded to.
The previous piece to Plastic Beach, which was called Coastal Collection, and in a way that was flotsam and jetsam, and it was what materials that were thrown from the land into the sea or washed off boats and so on. And that gave a slightly broader sort of stroke for me, because you were using all kinds of different materials. There was glass, there was china, there was metal, a lot of rust, that kind of thing. So there was a sort of different kind of scope, and it was an altogether different kind of challenge. Whereas by restricting myself to just purely plastic in this Plastic Beach installation, the parameters are slightly narrower, and it was a bit frustrating, because I often tend to open my mouth without thinking about what I'm going to say, and somebody said, "You're surely not going to make 500 pieces like you did with Coastal Collection." And of course I said, "Yes, I am." And by the time I got to about 150, I thought I was going to start screaming. But it was a real challenge, and it made me look really very hard at the structure of a beach, from low tide to high tide, which is where an awful lot of this stuff. But you can be sitting on a beach and just looking at the sea and wondering at it and how its mood changes and so on, and then suddenly in the middle of it all there'll be a bright yellow bobbing bottle or something. And we all have this kind of thing now where you never go anywhere without a bottle of water. And most people, when they're finished with that bottle of water, it seems to me, they just throw it in the sea. And they all come rushing up to Store Point, I think. Sometimes you think it's the only place where plastic is arriving, because it's arriving in such vast quantities.
Bob pick up something plastics. I think it should be the Bob felt something, the color or something, and so when Bob tried to remake, and I think he should completely look at how to change the form, or how to the injured, or how to change how the color changed from the long journey in the sea. It's his observation. It means I think he talked with his plastics. He just talked. I think he was talking with this plastics. I think he he wants to know your histories, its histories. And so he made very easy to say the remake or the similar. But Bob made what he understand, what kind of conversation with Bob and plastics. After all, the conversation is here. It is, I think, Bob's work. It's a result of the composition. The composition it comes from observe.
But it's the making that it's something that just has to be, I think. No, I mean, I think that it's just something that I do, and you have to kind of stand by that, and I think it's important, and it keeps me out of an awful lot of trouble too, I think, and the wonderful thing about anyone in the arts, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's poets or writers or filmmakers or sculptors or painters or whatever, the marvelous thing that seems to have happened in my kind of era is that you get there aren't boundaries anymore, and people can slide across and cover a whole range of areas. And not only that, if you have an idea and it isn't in your field, you can always find somebody who can do it for you technically. And this is a very noticeable change, I think, in the last 10, 15 years. One notices that it is about ideas, and you have an idea about something, you want to make Plastic Beach, right, you make it. If you can't make it yourself, then you would get somebody else to do it for you, and they'd probably make it a lot better. But it's very important to me that it's my hands that do it.
Well, in terms of outside influences that have shaped my work up until this point, I would say in terms of visual artists, people like Boyle family, Thomas Demand, and obviously Bob Callender as well. So I've been looking a lot over the last few years at artists who have recreated objects and aspects of reality to a point whereby you can't really tell what's been created, remade, and what is the original. So that's definitely been a huge influence.
And certainly one sees with students now, they're wide open to moving their ideas across different areas and using all the help they can get in order to carry them out. And this is great. It's marvellous.
Bob always recognised the value of studio visits by young artists and the fact that they would see how artists lived and worked and lived their lives. In the last few weeks of his life, I talked about the new space we had created, this white space to the rear of the studio, which was originally, we designed it as guest accommodation. I said to him, well, I'm going to start a residency in your name for young artists, and it's now been running successfully for 3 years with young artists from Scotland, Scotland-based artists, working alongside young artists from Japan for a month in the summer. And this residency also takes place in Japan as well. In recent years, we've held it in Osaka and Kyoto region, and then we're also going to start residencies in Tokyo as well.
Well, since I've been kind of more influenced by the northern landscape in the past years, I think looking thinking going to Japan will be a complete contrast to that. So it will be interesting to see how I feel there, and then how that changes my maybe approach to my work after that, and then maybe that'll influence my work at the Sea Loft next year.
Yeah, the idea of archaeology and maybe putting that in some kind of context, I feel like the work that I'm making is more contemporary archaeology. I'm trying to preserve things as they exist now, rather than maybe digging up ancient objects and using them. I'd much rather preserve things as they exist at the moment. Well, I think a residency like this allows you to try something new for a short period of time, knowing that you have an exhibition at the end of it, to create something maybe totally different that you wouldn't otherwise think of doing. And I feel that I have hopefully managed to achieve that, doing photography for the first time, casting body parts for the first time. So I think it just allows you to experiment, have a certain amount of freedom, but also focus very much on a particular set of challenges.
I find the whole process from building through to the discovery of fragments on a beach fascinating, and to try to interpret that excitement is a challenge. There are two main elements in this: structure and the discovery of how things are made. And this has a very formal aspect, particularly if the materials to be used are called cardboard and paper. It has not only to appear strong, but must in fact be so. The strength comes from an internal grid system, which is then covered by an outer skin. This part of the building of the pieces for the exhibition takes by far the greatest time and patience, and it also gives the mind time to consider carefully the kind of approach to be followed when the final surfaces are applied. And that is the second element, the deciding upon the materials that will produce the final surfaces. At one time, as a painter, plain and simple, it was paint on canvas. Now any material that I feel is stable enough will suffice. Wood ash of different sorts, either from the fire in our bothy up north, or from the log stove in Leith, peat mixed with acrylic, sawdust with paint and PVA, etc. These can provide the kind of textures I want. And as the work has developed over the last 3 years, the vocabulary has broadened so that there is more variety of surface to be applied. As it is the texture of the object that attracts me, and also the shape. You can see some of this process in the first piece in the film, which was in fact the last piece made for this exhibition, and it is called New Beginnings, and is hopefully going to have a feeling of optimism, but at the same time hint at the weathered fate that will be inevitable.
And I don't remember whether it was Bob's first show or his second show, but I hung one of his pretty well life-size rowing boats right above the front door. And everybody who walked in had to walk under it and looked at it and said, "Is that going to fall? Am I safe?" You know, and it was part of what the work was about. It was the reality of it. And not about fantasizing about things. There was a reality about his work, in spite of the fact that there was an unreality about it. And there was this tremendous contradiction, this juxtaposition of, it can't possibly lift that because it's a boat or it's a rudder, but in fact you can. And that was a kind of double take.
In every way, very normal council tenant, paying not both the land on which it was built, but at least it, and was paying an annual ground rent.
The residency in itself came in a time when I was trying to discover what my projects are about, what my work is about. It's a space that's not been built for purpose. It's a space that's been adapted for its own purpose today. And I really like to work with those, found the element of going there, not obliterate, but see what's there and making something out of it, which ranges from the work contained by the artists who live here, and the space itself is a witness of that. But yeah, I was extremely lucky to be here and to be at proximate level and discussions with both Bob and Liz. They talk to us young artists, and they give us the importance, not that we deserve, but the importance that they might see in us and in our valid. So they give us a validity that otherwise probably wouldn't have, which is extremely, it's extremely something that we don't deserve because we're here, just because, but because we're, it's just pure luck sometimes, and it's something that you're at the place at the right time.
Of course, it's a good experience for me, and my normal days I have another job, and I don't have a studio. Then my thinking and my limit is decide short room and no money, but this time in castle, very special field space I can use, and I need much time. Then I can find the new things. Maybe I have, but I can't notice myself. But this space and this time or this town notice me, myself. Then it's good experience in my future.
It was a great privilege and a pleasure for me working in the studio alongside Bob. It was such a compelling and single-minded individual. We were really a great team over 40 years, living life to the full in the two outstanding studios that we created, first in Leith and then in this commanding position on the Fife Coast. And of course, he will continue to be an inspiration for so many of us well into the future. Thinking about our daily routine and working practice, there was very little talk between us in the studio. Any discussion happened at the end of the day, and that was very much in keeping with his Zen-like state of mind while making.
The studio is, of course, the workplace where an initial idea may develop and expand, a clutter of materials and half-formed ideas. As I now tend to work on several pieces at once, mainly due to the fact that some items tend to take rather a long time to dry, I find it interesting to see objects against each other, and this can often help in the placing of pieces in an exhibition space.
Sea Loft is about so many things, things that I have not an idea of, because Bob and Liz have hosted a lot of art. No, I don't want to say art activities, events, but art that kind of merged with music, dance, contemporary thought, ideas, and invited and it's not like an elitist approach. There's a dialogue. There's some genuinity about this place that is at the heart of the people who transformed it from a derelict space into a hub of life, in a way to say that. As a space, it's brilliant because you're working beside the objects, which are extremely important. They're just beside you. You can actually pick them up. The light is amazing. The easterlies are terrible to behold, Apart from that, it's something to be rediscovered. It's something that changes. It changes, it morphs, it adapts itself.
I had had for some time the feeling that it would be interesting to take a piece of work built in the studio in a rather artificial situation and take it back to its source. In other words, taking it back up north. This Easter we took a piece back, only part of a large piece, as you can see, and placed it in various locations near to the bothy. There's something quite interesting about seeing something which is artificial and seeing how it actually sits in a natural environment. The whole process of designing the poster and the subject matter seems to me to point a possible direction that the work might go in the future. It would be, I think, quite nice to try the idea of taking artificial things and instead of putting them in an artificial environment like a gallery, just placing them randomly in the landscape so that people discover them in the same way that I've discovered them in my mind, basically.
This concept of focus was truly at the core of his production, as were his research and tremendous powers of observation. He somehow saw beyond his subject to reveal its inner nature and the true poetry of the everyday. And although the work was labour-intensive, there was somehow an effortlessness about it and a touch of both mystery and mastery in the way Bob handled his chosen media. His meditations on the area between high and low tide seemed to involve his setting illusion aside and seeing things without the distortion created by any outside influences or thoughts. Bob was always true to himself, thus the originality of his work. Although 15 years my senior, I always had the feeling he was somehow younger than me. And as you might imagine, he was always remarkably full of mischief.
In every way, very normal council tenant, paying not both the land on which it was built, but at least it, and was paying an annual ground rent.
I met the three artists, the Western artists. Three of them is a little bit older than me. The one is a German artist. His name is Fritz Schwegler. He already retired the Kunstakademie Düsseldorf. I think he is not well known here in UK, but he is very famous artist in Germany, and so Schwegler and the English artist Roger Ackling and Bob. These three artists gave me a big influence because for them the artwork and life combined, very natural, native, and their works. Of course, not only the ideas, materials, or quite a lot from the. It comes from their normal life, daily life, and I learned a lot from these three older artists.
I remember obviously very clearly Bob as a young tutor, and he had a kind of charismatic presence, and he was a great favourite because students know who is really on their side, who's good, who's engaged, who really will go that kind of length for them. And Bob, was highly praised, and I remember him well. He didn't teach us, but I remember him walking around the college, and I remember his great sort of principled stand he used to take on things. He was never afraid to react to things he didn't agree with or believe in, or to people who he felt weren't doing their job correctly. He was very, very principled and brave like that. And I remember Paul Furneaux, the artist, when he first got his scholarship to Japan, and he told Bob, and Bob came down the corridor and just enveloped him in a big bear hug. And that kind of warmth was exceptional. There was nobody else who dared to do that or who cared that much. He was one of these people, I think, and when I got to know him, it was, borne out that he had no compartments to him. The man who was the artist, who was the friend. It was all of a piece. It was very highly principled kind of motivation behind him. But he was very outspoken, and there were many incidents, weren't there, where he was hauled over the coals because he had, been so outspoken. And I think that for the students, if you were working and you were committed to your work, then he was absolutely with you every step of the way. But he did rather, quite rightly, get scunnered with people who were dilettanti. It was a wonderful thing, I think, to have him as a friend for all those years, because I certainly felt that he was kind of really on my side.
He had really big hands. I know that's kind of, it's like, he had hands like a miner. I mean, he kind of was a miner, I worked for his son Mike, and they were made large. I don't know what they were made from, but they were made from big stock. I think he used to tease me about being formal, about always wanting to shake his hand whenever I saw him, and I always saw that as a mark of respect. And he was always just like, "Why are you so formal?" But yeah, something in there kind of sums him up. I'm not entirely sure, but
every time I come to Scotland, I stayed a couple of days here in Sealoft, and for me the upstairs and every time to toast with Bob, it is for me it is a very good time. Every night, cheers, Strangibar. That's all.
Well, it was funny when we were researching for the A2B edition in the studio. We're looking through old files of Bob's and notebooks and so on, and we found this cryptic note to himself on one of these yellow stickies, and it said A2B ego trip. He was immensely modest, so this was typical of him.
It's a kind of daunting prospect when you stand there and look at all the work that you've done and feel that a great many of the things there could be better, or if you were going to do the same thing over again, the next time you would do this, or make it appear slightly different, or perhaps pay more attention to some kind of detail. However, an exhibition is only a kind of staging post. It is an indication, really, of what you can do at a particular point in your life. So, it's not to be taken as a final act. And with a bit of luck, the next show will actually move on. It'll have a greater strength and power about it. At least that's what I feel at the moment.